Mr. Cummins,
Present.
Ms. Bannon,
Present.
Mr. Groft,
Present.
Ms. Golder,
Present.
Mr. Williams,
Present.
and Mr. Greeley. I don't see him.
No, I don't either. So we'll
Yeah.
have to report him as absent for the moment. But seeing a quorum present, we will begin this work session of the Historic Preservation Commission. And for any members of the public who are listening in, I want to thank you for your interest and your attention to these matters. I would remind you that we're not taking any public testimony on these work session subjects, but I encourage you to make notes if these matters come from a formal public hearing and request of approval. That might help you. And also, please remember that this is being recorded and you can review that anytime you wish by going to the department's website and getting the proper link to do that proper information. Okay. Well, let's see. Where's our team for the city dock? Are they present? John, do you?
I don't see them.
There's Eileen. There's Ms. Fogarty. Eileen, are you tuned in?
Yes.
The applicants for the St. Mary's project, I spoke to them before everybody joined in, and they are willing to wait for your presentation to conclude. Are you able and willing to do that?
Yes, we have everyone here. We are delighted. We thank them. Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
And-
let's go.
I just want to make sure the other members of our
Okay.
presentation are present. And also, as soon as I get started, Josh, who is handling this meeting, Josh, if you could show the slides so everyone can see them.
Okay, just before you begin, I want to make one statement for you and your team and for all the commissioners. Some of us have reviewed this project in its previous requests for approval of different portions. The rest of you, new commissioners included, of course, have, I think, followed this carefully and were part of the last review process and approval process. We are not reviewing the whole project. Even though what we're hearing tonight, the visitor center is very major part of the project and has caused great public concern. Remember, that's all we're going to review tonight, and it is a work session. So please try to keep your questions to this current topic, and I hope we'll be able to get our concerns addressed and share those concerns with the team. They've been very responsive so far. All right, Eileen?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a hold of Josh. Oh, Josh, wonderful, my hero. First of all, trust me, after 3 hours today with Xfinity, we are thrilled and delighted that we are up and running. Good evening. My name is Eileen Fogarty, City Dock Project Manager, and our team is very excited about sharing this project with all of you this evening, and particularly talking with the new members who have not seen this before. With me this evening is Bryce Turner, BCT architect. He will be speaking. James Sink, who is with Mahan Reichel, landscape architect. Rob Thuma, who is the chief engineer for the project with WSP, and Kim Dayleader, who is a historic preservationist with Traceries Preservation. We also have Matt Kelly available, and Burr Vogel, our Public Works Director, is flying in and hoping to join us in a little while. So there we go. So with that said, I'd like to share a very brief overview background just to ensure that everyone has the same information as we start the discussion. Next slide, please, Josh. Tonight we'll talk very briefly about the approvals, the current Harbor Master Building, the Prince George Street Park, and the site plan, which are part of the approvals along with the Maritime Welcome Center. the evolution of the Harbor Master Welcome Center building, Maryland Historic Trust's approval, and compliance with historic district guidelines. Next, please, Josh. I think you all are aware of this, but the numbers are just so astonishing. This entire effort at looking at our downtown and resiliency was initiated in 2019 in March by the City Dock Action Committee. And the impetus at that time was the fact that the city over several years, actually a few decades, had had the highest increase in flooding, 925% in the nation. Since then, as you all know, it has even increased. This past year, there were 120 flooding events, almost twice the amount we had in 2019. So the urgency and the seriousness of the situation is really what has been the driving force behind this project as well as our overall resiliency project. Next, please. As the process went forward in 2019, the City Dock Action Committee also saw an opportunity, since there was a need for flood barriers and raised earthen area, to turn what was a heat island, a sea of asphalt, into a world-class park. So that became the second driver of the process. Next, please. You all are aware, but when we look at it in hindsight, it's an amazing process. It's been 6 years. It'll be 6 years this March, 2019 to 2025. Over 350 stakeholder meetings, public work sessions and hearings, 150. Again, all starting that first year with the 9,200 member City Dock Action Committee. Next slide, please. As a result, the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission this past spring approved the resiliency project for City Dock. Next slide. The Historic Preservation Commission then in September approved the amendment to the City Dock site plan, which included the stage, the utility pergola, and the fountain. Next slide, please. With all of this going forward, part of the discussion during the City Dock Action Committee and the City Dock Consensus Plan was about really the need or the opportunity to look at Bertis Basin and add to the commercial uses that were there, recreational, educational uses, provide direct access for a broad range of our citizenry to the water, and to celebrate our maritime history. Next slide, please. Out of those expectations came what we call the Harbor Master Maritime Welcome Center process. It also has been a multi-year engagement process. It has from 2023 to 2025, there have been over 100 meetings in just over a year. During that time, there have been tremendous amount of input. There have been redesigns, and you'll hear that from Bryce. Most recently, we met with the Historic Preservation Commission and Planning Commission in October for a work session, Planning Commission in December for a hearing, and we'll be meeting with you in February, on February 11th, for a public hearing. Next slide, please. The Planning Commission approved the City Dock site plan for the Harbor Master and the Welcome Center, along with the Prince George Street Park. The application that we're going to be discussing with you tonight, they approved it on January 2nd of this month. Critical Area Commission approved it in the very beginning. I think it was December 5th of 2024. So with that said, next slide, and Bryce Turner is going to take it from here.
I'm wondering if Bryce has been promoted to panelist yet. I see him in the attendees list.
It wouldn't be an HPC meeting without Bryce.
I know.
Not for City Dock.
I'm pulling him in now. Before I go back to the screen.
In addition to Bryce, the other panelists to be promoted should be James, who I think has been promoted, Rob Thuma, and Kim Dayleader. They should all be promoted.
I think, and all those other ones are here.
There we
Bryce
go.
is here
That,
now.
that worked. Thank you for the promotion. I will also turn my camera on. There we go. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you. Thank you for the opportunity to have this session and for us to share with you certainly some progress. Can you see me? I don't see the screen now.
Yes.
Okay, great. And now if I can just see the screen, let me change my view. There we go. Okay. Thank you all. So I'm going to get started. Thank you, Eileen. We've put a circle around the existing Harbor Master building here at City Dock. And here in this sea of asphalt, which we know about the flooding that Eileen has mentioned, we also have an incredible heat island effect. I think this aerial photograph really speaks to a lot of the issues there, which it's a massive fortress of a building there, really, that's in the middle of what we want to make one of the greatest urban waterfront parks in America. And we think that removing the building here and rebuilding elsewhere is the right thing to do. And it will make for a much better situation for generations to come. Next slide. Couple photographs of the building, and you're all very familiar with it. Of course, this structure is made of brick and concrete block. It's fairly massive. The toilets are on the ground floor of the building, so it creates a lot of solid blank walls when you're around it, which doesn't help any of that heat effect. There's a small visitors kiosk outside that's very inadequate for its purpose, really, and can also be incredibly hot in the summertime. So this is the exterior of the building, which of course you're familiar with. The next slide, please, shows some of the interior space. And these functions really need to be recreated in a much better format and in the new structure. Some of the views from the top of the building are not too bad, because they can see Ego Alley, but they really can't see Spa Creek very well at all. The restrooms there are inadequate, to put it nicely. There's a lot of solid walls, masonry walls, that are difficult for flexibility in terms of expanding and creating work groups and things like that. So these are some of the issues with the existing Harbor Master building. Next slide, please. So I mentioned, some of these challenges. It's kind of the middle of the parking lot. It's not immediately adjacent to the water, of course. We really don't have any reasonable space there for activation or programming or activities, because it is a full parking bay away, 70, 80 feet from the water. It blocks views, as we'll share with you in some other analysis that we've done. And quite frankly, it's just uninviting in a lot of ways, and it's not a very welcoming center. Next slide. So, there are lots of other examples in waterfront communities of the ways that people have created harbor master type functions with welcoming centers. Newport, Rhode Island, Plymouth, Massachusetts, and even nearby in Rock Hall, Maryland. Now, these are not examples that we're sharing for architectural purposes, but just to kind of share a little bit about what's out there. You certainly see some 2- and 3-story structures here. And there is a certain amount of programming that happens in these facilities, but I think it's important to understand what else is happening elsewhere in the world in this regard. We're in a fairly unique situation in which ours is a municipal dock, but we really do compete with private facilities as well, because people have choices when they travel, and we want Annapolis to be a top destination for boaters, but as we'll also talk about, for locals as well. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we think we can improve and provide with the location of the Harbor Master and Maritime Welcome Center next to Burtis is that we get closer proximity to the water. If there's one thing we heard throughout this entire process since the City Dock Action Committee, it is access to the water for locals, not just boaters, but for locals too. And that can mean kayaking, water paddle boards, etc. You know, not everybody has a boat. And there's also the opportunity, though, for educational programs. We heard a lot right in the City Hall building about providing environmental education programs that focus on Chesapeake Bay, water quality, etc. And there is a desire to see a ferry here and to have some better transportation options to get to other portions of the Western Shore, as well as potentially the Eastern Shore, and to be able to have other types of boating activities. And then lastly, of course, which is a really important consideration, is by having the Maritime Welcome Center in this location, we can activate the historic Burtis House and provide vertical circulation in the building so that we get our ADA access, which is even a little more challenging with the elevation of the building to avoid the harmful rising seas. If we put the elevator and the stairs within Burtis alone, it would fill up almost the entire building. If you have, International Building Code egress provided, so by being able to provide it in the adjacent structure, it frees up Burtis to be a useful part of the programming here at the water's edge. Next slide. This is a view from Main Street, which we shared with you during the site plan approval process. It is looking out from the top of Main Street. I love this view, actually. You can even see Annapolis Roads out there. There's a freight container ship out there. But the Maritime Welcome Center, the Harbor Master structure do not impede this view at all. There's a few trees that will be added that you'll probably see as some greenery there at the end. But the location of the new building, the proposed building, will not impact this view at all. As a matter of fact, much less so than the current building. Next slide. So we did some, certainly some site analysis here, looking at the view corridor, if you will, from the Market House. And this is at this cone of vision shown here in white represents what you can see if there was nothing else other than built structures in front of you. Of course, there's a lot of cars and everything else. But when you're at the foot of the Market House building, the front door looking out, the existing Harbor Master building is shown there in black, and there's a little electric shed that's built down there as well that we've got to relocate and rebuild. And then in this next slide, you see the comparative view when the Welcome Center Harbor Master is moved adjacent to Burtis. And so, if anything, it creates a wider cone of vision, even though, of course, there's a lot of urban design and other elements there between trees and boats and everything else that do block your views. We did some other study in this next slide as well, just looking at it from the foot of Main Street, that has a slightly different view than the top of Main Street. But we thought this was worthwhile to see as well. And so when you're looking at it from the foot of Main Street, the Chop Tank building there really starts to block the view to some extent. And then with the existing Harbor Master view, it's a fairly tight cone of vision from there. But in this next slide, you can see the slight change that it does make with the new structure. So it is true that somewhat oblique angle looking across the site is a little tighter. And I thought it only fair to add this exhibit in here as well. Next slide. And James with Mahan Reichel is going to talk about Prince George Street Park.
Thanks, Bryce. So in addition to the building, the project includes new pedestrian circulation and a new public pocket park, which we're referring to as Prince George Street Park. Next slide. And as Will mentioned in the introduction, it's important to understand that this project, which is outlined in the dashed line, is a continuation of the new and improved public realm assets proposed along City Dock, which include a widened promenade, a new Dock Street Park, and a renovated Susan Campbell Park. The edges of our site, on the western edge, it's the existing Latitude 38 restaurant. To the north is the Naval Academy perimeter wall. And then on the east side, there's an existing dinghy dock for people landing on small watercraft from the mooring buoys in Spa Creek. And then there's a couple existing docks also existing on that eastern edge. Next slide, please. So here's a bird's eye view of the site as it exists today. And you can see there's obviously the large parking lot, Susan Campbell Park to the south. You see the existing Burtis House, and then looming sort of to the north is the Naval Academy Field House. Next slide. And you see that the context to this site changes dramatically with the full build out of City Dock public realm improvements. This view, you can see that the Maritime Welcome Center is now attached to Burtis House. Prince George Street Park is there, located to the north of Burtis House, between the Field House and Burtis House. Next slide. Another element to understand about this project is the inclusion of climate resiliency. Flood barriers are integrated into the design, and the flood barriers on this project create the final leg of protection that's wrapping all around Ego Alley and ultimately connecting to the Naval Academy Resiliency Defense Project. And I'll point out specifically where these elements are on the site in some of the views we'll be showing you. Next slide. So rendered site plan for the project. You can see that public access and circulation is provided on all sides of the building. Seating areas with tables and chairs are provided on the southern and eastern sides of the building of the Maritime Welcome Center. And an alley to the west provides pedestrian and service vehicle access from the end of Prince George Street down to the end of the Dock Street pedestrian promenade. To the north of Burtis House is Prince George Street Park, which you'll see in more detail in the next couple of slides. This view is taken from the bottom of a proposed pedestrian ramp, and we're standing pretty close to the existing Gate Zero. The ramp and the stairs that you see in the middle of the page are leading up to Prince George Street Park, which is elevated so that it relates to the new raised elevation of Burtis House. Something you might have noticed is already underway out on the site. The raised elevation of the park and the associated seat walls also create the necessary flood barrier for this part of the site. So the three terrace seat walls that you can see some people sitting on the top of that is at elevation 8, which is the elevation which we're protecting all of City Dock 2. And there's actually a hidden float up barrier located at the top of those stairs. And that barrier will only deploy and will deploy automatically based on water levels when they rise. And finally, in this view in the foreground, you can see there's a new floating dock proposed that would be used for launching kayaks. And behind that, along the promenade, is the associated kayak racks. Next slide, please. This is an elevated view taken from the end of Prince George Street. And we're looking down on Prince George Street Park in its entirety. There's a double set of stairs and a pedestrian ramp, which allow people to access the elevated pocket park. We've provided a generous amount of seating and gathering space, both for people to use individually and small groups, but we also see this as a place that can host school groups and tour groups as they learn more about the history and the maritime culture of Annapolis, something that's particularly appropriate here with the historic Burtis House. We are showing a placeholder for a sculptural element that would help anchor this open and flexible space, but the actual sculpture piece would be something that would be commissioned by the city in the future. Next slide. Something that we know the commission is concerned with is the compatibility of the materials that we're using on the site. And what we've done is we've selected materials that are really known and noted for their timeless character and durability. The palette that you see here largely takes its cues from the City Dock project and in turn, the larger Annapolis Historic District. Most of the paving is the city standard clay brick paving, shown in red here. And that is a full range red brick made by Pine Hall Brick. You can see a little snip of the photo if you're not familiar with this material that you see all throughout the city. The areas directly adjacent to the building, we're proposing a concrete unit paver. And you can see that in the top photo and shown in blue. And this is the same paver that we're using in Dock Street Park. It's a gray color with a little bit of modeling to create some interest. It gives it sort of a stone-like character because of that modeling that exists unique from one paver to the next. And then the wood deck promenade that follows along Ego Alley continues for a portion of this site, and that's what you see in yellow. All the proposed walls and planter curbs, which are shown in the dark blue line work, are clad in a light gray granite that would have a flamed finish. And that's a photo of that granite specifically used in some stone tread steps. Next slide, please. Uh-oh. Did we skip one or are we missing? We're missing a slide. Well, I'll just tell you about the planting design, even though we don't have a slide for it. Maybe if we could go back to the rendered site plan, that might serve our purposes. Here we go. Oh, sorry, we skipped it. One more. Thank you. The plant palette which we've proposed for the project is all native, and it's mostly made up of shrub plantings that are going to help ground and soften the relationship between people walking around the site and the structures that are on the site. We've also proposed some native perennials and grasses that we've incorporated to provide pops of color and seasonal interest. There is one specimen tree proposed in Prince George Street Park. It's situated to provide shade and shelter in the raised seating area there in the park. That's a topic we could definitely show in more detail the next time we see you all. We have a planting plan which is included in the site plan application. if you are interested in specific planting species. That's all shown in there. And that concludes the landscape architecture portion of the presentation. Thank you.
So my name's Rob Tuma. I'm with WSP. I'm the civil engineer working on this project, and we're going to go over some of the engineering drawings, really supporting the site around the building that James just described. So James and I worked together to integrate both the aesthetic of the site as well as the engineering. So this is just an overview slide. If you can go to the next slide, please. One more. So this is the grading plan. It's showing the grades around the site. We've got in the alleyway, we've got a grade coming up from Prince George to meet the grade at the park, and also the grade of the proposed Maritime Welcome Center, and then also the Burtis House, which has been already elevated. The Maritime Welcome Center has a finished floor of elevation 7 to match the base flood elevation, and the Burtis House is being raised to slightly higher at 8.5. Around the site, we make sure the grading meets ADA requirements, slopes no more than 5% in accessible routes, unless there's a ramp with handrails and such. So we work to make that all work, as well as the drainage throughout the site. Next slide, please. So this is the drainage plan. Works in conjunction with that grading plan to make sure that we are collecting water and treating water as required by MDE and the city of Annapolis. We've got a couple of important stormwater elements on the site. There are some rain gardens being used for water quality. Those are closer to the park and closer to the Ego Alley. They're in the stipple type shading. We've also got some silvacells, which are underground detention facilities that also collect and treat the water. They can also be used for tree health, so there's some multi-use there. Those are the darker green shades closer to the Naval Academy. And then because of the grade changes that are occurring from the flood protection in the park and all of the other things coming to this area, we will have an area behind the flood barriers that needs to be able to be drained. So we have a pump station at the end of Prince George Street that will help pump any rainwater that is collected behind the flood walls and get it out to the bay. Next slide. We have a utilities plan. Obviously, with the buildings, we will need water, sewer, electrical, and such. Most of the building utilities are coming in on the west side of the building, closer to latitude 38. But we do have a water line that runs along the water's edge, and that is to feed fire hydrants closer to gate 0. So this is just an overlook at those utilities running in the project area. Next slide. And then lighting. Obviously, this is a public space, and public safety is important. So we need light levels that promote public safety. And we have light poles that are the standard City of Annapolis light poles scattered throughout the park. And then we've also got light fixtures that are attached to the Maritime Welcome Center. And then this is the hardscape plan, which is really just, as I was mentioned before, melding what James spoke about and what I spoke about. This details out where all of those hardscape elements are, the aesthetic features, the granite curbs and the paver types. So the engineering and the landscape architecture coming together here. Next slide. We'll turn it back over to Bryce.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, if we can move right on to the next slide, we'll start talking a little bit more about the Harbor Master Maritime Welcome Center and its context and how we got to the design that we have today. This is a historic photograph aerial, actually. Not exactly sure the year this one was taken, but where you can see the various seafood industrial buildings at Annapolis City Dock. And this is the hustle and bustle that I think many of us have become aware of by studying City Dock, with the various sloops and shipping and oysters, etc. You can see the Burtis House at the left there. It's relatively small in comparison to a lot of the other things that are happening there, but it was an interesting configuration of forms and uses throughout City Dock, and it was constantly evolving. Next slide. A couple of other historic photos. This one from 1899, I believe. This is looking up Prince George Street from Spa Creek, and you can see the Burtis House there just off to the left side of the street. It has two windows there. You'll notice that the windows and configuration changes a little bit over time. There are a couple shed structures adjacent to it, and even a small kind of single sloped shed roof right there over the promenade at that edge. A lot going on. It was a bustling place. Next slide, please. Which is a 1927 historic photo. Still not many cars in sight. But you'll notice in this photo, there's no porch on the front of the Burtis House. There's actually now kind of three openings on that side facing east and towards Eastport, and but similar sheds next door, just to the to the southwest or southeast of Burtis. See the Capitol in the background. It's a very interesting view. Next slide. So there are a lot of things that we've got to accommodate here to be successful. Not only do we have to create a very attractive building, it's got to accommodate and do the things that we need it to do. We want to replace the harbor master function to a place where it will no longer be an impediment to the park and to some of the resiliency effort, but actually be tucked in just behind the wall that that James and Rob spoke about, kind of the flood barrier wall, but it'll still be close to the water in that new location, which I think is important. The building will have a lot of maritime functions. It is a maritime use building because of these various uses that it has. But it also will have public restrooms. It will have other boater facilities that would include showers, etc., as well as restrooms for them, and even a washer and dryer and some of those uses. And the educational space that I spoke about earlier, which can happen here and accommodate some small watercraft. Next slide. So the design that we've been considering has a lot of criteria that's important for it to follow. And obviously your Annapolis Historic District guidelines are chief among them. The height of the building is closely regulated. We're in zone 1 of the historic district, so that keeps us to 22-foot maximum cornice elevation and a 32-foot maximum ridge of the roof, and that's of course measured from the adjacent grade. And we meet those requirements. The bulk and the mass of the building is also regulated by various means in the guidelines. The facade width, you can't do just large, kind of undifferentiated facades without breaking it up a little bit so it feels part of the Annapolis streetscape. And then, of course, the materials need to be compatible with and complementary to the palette that is already in Annapolis and that we've grown to love. Next slide. So in addition to the historic context, there's been incredible community involvement in this project, more than any project I've ever been involved in, that's for sure. And it's been helpful. I think we've learned a lot. I think we've been able to engage a lot of people, make people feel like that they've really been heard in the process. We're very blessed here to have very talented and engaged architects and landscape architects here in Annapolis who were willing to share some of their time and really be a part of the planning process and the design of this Maritime Welcome Center Harbor Master building that we're talking about tonight. Next slide. So a lot of the things that we heard, and then in addition to the City Dock Action Committee, of course, there were lots of meetings with the boat show, with the tour boats, with Watermark, with Ward 1 and various wards around the city. A lot of feedback was received, and we certainly have tried to incorporate that and balance it with the needs and true functions of the building that we have to accommodate. But a lot of the things that continue to come out and we hear loud and clear is waterfront experience. Of course, this idea of direct water access, a place to dip your toe into the water if you so desire. We heard a lot from people who used to jump off the bridge in the water here. That may be happening again someday, but you got to do it carefully, that's for sure. Water safety and education, that can be a part of the functionality of this building and was frequently discussed and brought up in our meetings. We also heard people obviously telling us that they thought the building should be smaller. And we tried very hard to accommodate that and other requests about the design of the building. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And that this structure should address the water, its waterfront address, as much as it does the park and Dock Street. And at some point during the process, we actually rotated the building, which I'll talk about some more. And the public needs direct access to any outdoor components of this building that it can. And obviously the interior components of the building are open during working hours for visitors, boaters, and the public for the restrooms, in addition to the harbor master. Next slide. So a few of the things I just want to mention is how we address some of these things. First of all, the area of the building has been reduced. We've been talking about it having been reduced by 600 square feet. It's actually over 1,000 square feet on all three levels it's been reduced by since we were in front of you presenting this to you October 19th of 2023. And obviously the building has evolved and even rotated 90 degrees here. So there's a lot that's changed. And I also just want to point out, I mean, the functions have changed too. There was a time 2-3 years ago when we hoped that we were going to be the gateway to the Chesapeake, and hopefully we still will be. But there were a lot of other uses that we were trying to accommodate early on in the process that has changed. So we are building a structure of approximately 4,550 square feet above grade to replace one that's 3,160 square feet. So it is a little larger, but it does accomplish a lot more things. The building was rotated 90 degrees. At one point, we had the peaks of the ridges perpendicular to the park. Now they're really parallel to the park, as you can see in this aerial drawing. And that new orientation really helps the building be more transparent. We have a lot of glass, which we think is appropriate on these smaller ends of the building. That really allow you to some extent to see well into the building and even through with the right angles to the water, which we think is important. And then there's a large deck on the building, which we did not reduce the size of the deck per se. I think it's something that was very desirable and loved, and it will have public access with a staircase that will be able to get up there, as well as interior elevator during working hours, but it will be accessible to the public, which I think is an important thing, and a type of crow's nest that I think the harbor master can, function and use some furniture as necessary out there to get the kind of views they want if they want to actually step outside and put eyes on the water. Next slide. So it's an elevation drawing, which helps us obviously to understand the building in its two-dimensional representation of its vertical height. And here we can confirm that the roof, while the top ridge of the roof is 29 feet 3 inches above sea level, it is, I'm sorry, it's actually 29 feet 3 inches above grade, which makes it well within its 32-foot requirement for the ridge of the roof. The cornice line, we're going to be right at 22 feet, which was a challenge because it's very tight for a modern building with sprinklers and HVAC and things like that. But we do meet those requirements, and it's critical that we do that. Burtis also meets those requirements. It's very close also at the cornice, but the ridge of the roof is actually more shallow at Burtis because the pitch, of course, of the roof is very shallow. In this image, you do see a concept I'll talk about a little bit more, which is that of two volumes that have peaked roofs and glass on the water side of the building here that are separated from one another by this darker hyphen element. That's kind of an important architectural element for us that kind of breaks it up into two masses, and that we think makes it much more complementary to the very small scale of the Burtis house. And between Burtis and the first shed roof, we have a very glass hyphen structure that allows access to the elevators and to the stair, but separates it from Burtis and makes a very light touch on Burtis. And this is something that I've seen in Europe for years, how you can create a very simple separation and one that's very clean and does not interfere at all with the historic nature of Burtis. So it's very clear what came before the other. Next slide, please. A couple of aerial views of the new Maritime Welcome Center with the two shed roofs and the somewhat continuous cedar shake roofing that becomes the siding of the building. A couple of the larger window openings here you'll see are surrounded by this copper shroud that I think is very attractive and will be a real wonderful feature of the building. This shows the structure parallel to the park so that you enter the Maritime Welcome Center for the harbor master or for the visitor center or the public toilets right here at the end of Dock Street. And that will be really the accessible entrance for the building also, because of the various changing grades that we have around it. We have to accommodate the low grade at the harbor's edge, but also the higher raised elevation of the park. But we think it's going to be a beautiful structure with a lot of landscaping and seating, and will fit very nicely here at the end of Dock Street. Next slide. So one of the other important steps for us once we'd gotten the design to a certain level was to take it to the Maryland Historic Trust. MHT has an easement on the structure with the Burtis house. So it was very important for us to get their approval here as to how we touch and connect to Burtis. And so we shared with them, when we first went in there, our volumetric concept that I spoke about with the two shed roofs and the hyphens separating these various forms that helps to bring everything down in scale. The connection with the accessibility for Burtis. And obviously we shared with them images like this that show that all of the new construction is really in the rear of Burtis, where those historic seafood industry buildings had been. Next slide. And the trust met with us and provided some very good feedback. And we were able to incorporate some of that feedback before making a final submission to them. Their feedback was primarily asking us to pull the deck and stairs a little bit further away from Burtis. We originally had the stair kind of running along the side, this east side of Burtis, and they asked that we pull it away from it, which we did. We had a door going into the side of Burtis, and we took that out and made it simpler and more like it had been in some of those 1927 photographs. And then the secondary egress to this rear elevation also was all tucked back behind Burtis. And these were things that made a lot of sense. We were able to accommodate that. And they also asked us to focus on this hyphen connection and make it the lightest touch possible. And they did feel that we could put some mechanical equipment on top of it if we needed to, but it could be a glass box with a flat roof, and that would be a very easy touch to the back of Burtis. And so, of course, that's what we did. Next slide. So late in the summer, in August, I guess, we received concept approval, and we will be resubmitting to MHT with final construction documents, I guess, next month in February. These are the materials that we're using in the building, and I think the materiality is incredibly important here to be complementary to the Annapolis streetscape. And it really goes the gambit from a granite tile that we're using in places along the base of the building to a tension cable railing system that has a certain nautical feel to it that I think is very appropriate, to steel and glass window system that gives us a little smaller mullion size than you might otherwise have in an aluminum system. We also have bird-friendly glass that we're using so that those expanses of glass are safe for birds. And there's a dot pattern that is screened onto the glass, which is not very noticeable when you're inside the glass, but it's enough to allow the birds to escape it. A couple different types of wood that we're using on the bottom row here: tongue and groove, wood plank, for a portion of the edges of the eave of the building that you'll see. Cedar shake I mentioned on the roof, and it's really a primary material on the roof and the sides of the building. Of course, that'll develop a patina over time. And then we're using an interesting product that's thermally modified and is a darker color, but it makes the wood stronger actually, and even better for outdoor use. And this is for the hyphen where we're going for a dark look between the two shed roofs. And the copper metal which will wrap around some of the windows, the copper window surround, or shroud as I like to call it. Next slide, please. So this elevation,
Want to keep calling it a shroud?
let's see, I'll show you in a better photograph or better image, but this on the far left of this image, on the elevation drawing, you can see that brown color right behind the people there on the balcony, and it wraps around the window opening, just defining it. And it's a little bit more of a contemporary way to do a framing around a window rather than using moldings.
I'm just pulling your leg about the shroud.
Okay. I'm going to hide behind the shroud now. Anyway, you'll see some more of that as we go along. I think it's going to be very fun. This exhibit shows the exterior materials and keynotes them into the various locations on the structure. Next slide. We thought another important thing to compare and contrast here, especially for the public and for anyone interested, is, well, how does all this relate to the existing Harbor Master building? So we built a little three-dimensional model of the Harbor Master building so that it would kind of be apples and apples when you compare the two together. in their proposed forms, even though this is the existing Harbor Master building. So you can see, again, I mentioned the solid walls for the ground level of the structure. It's very fortress-like because of the nature of the toilets being on that ground level, no windows, and the small visitor kiosk. You do get some larger windows at the top, which work for the Harbor Master. Next slide. So when you compare these two buildings together, the Harbor Master building on the top left and the new Harbor Master building, Maritime Welcome Center, on the right, the sloped roof of the proposed new structure, of course, is slightly lighter gray there at the top. And so it kind of angles back, much like the roof of the Harbor Master building. But it's of a similar size. And of course, it is a little larger. But I do want to point out that one of the things that we think works really well for this Maritime Welcome Center building in the new Harbor Master is that we get a smaller shed roof here closest to the park. And I'll point that out in the renderings in a minute. And you can see where it's kind of grayed back on the very right. So you never see all that much at one time other than these two-dimensional elevation drawings. And then there's the elevation drawing on the bottom left of the new structure and kind of that elevation of the existing Harbor Master building to the bottom right. So we are a little wider and we got a little more going on area-wise than the existing building, but it's not like it's twice as big or anything like that. Next slide. So a couple of views from the water, which are important to us, and from Spa Creek, which we think it fits in this ensemble nicely. Next slide. And a couple of views as you walk around the building. You can see that kind of copper surround or shroud around the window openings on this elevation. We've created a slight cant to the handrail to make it a little more difficult for anybody to climb up that railing because it has a cap that would prevent you from going over it, which we think is important. And the landscaping will be consistent with the park. And James has looked at how all that landscaping can relate. And of course, the lighting is very important in this building. We've met with the lighting designers now, and it will have a certain glow from the inside, a very warm glow. You'll see the natural wood that's inside the building. This is a wood frame structure. It's not using steel for its structure. It has wood beams in the ceiling, which you can see to some extent there in the rendering through the window. And we're excited about the beauty of lighting those wood beams within the structure. A truss is really not needed. These sheds are so small in width. Next slide, please. And another view where you see the deck, which is a large enough space that it could work. It's not going to work for weddings or anything like that at a large scale, certainly, but it will work for the public to access it, and the Harbor Master will control that space. And I think it would be very valuable for them as their offices will be just inside those glass doors, and they'll have great views of the water from that point. Below the deck, we can do some various functions, educational space. It'll be dry space under there. The deck will be solid, if you will. Rain will not come through it. And it will be a great space for seating, and as well as like where these Adirondack chairs are shown to get down to the water's level. And I think people will really enjoy this without having to be in a paying restaurant, for instance. You can see the kayak stand there that James spoke about. Next slide, please. And another view of the front of the building, and I'm sure this is enough, but you can see our stair that connects the public to the upper level deck that we pulled away from Burtis. Next slide. And how it kind of relates to the Dock Street structures. It won't be as tall as some of the buildings on Dock Street, of course, that were built perhaps before those design guidelines were issued, but we think it does complement those structures well. Next slide. And then looking at it kind of from this Prince George Park elevation, we've tried to study it to where we can get that light touch behind Burtis here to accommodate these maritime uses that are maritime dependent. Next slide. And one more. I think that's maybe our last slide. Or again, looking at from Burtis with the ground level view. And one more. So this is an important view, I think, which is at the foot of Prince George Street, where you can see the park that James spoke to, which has been raised up a bit along with the Burtis House, which has now been raised. And so now we've got to bring this site up to it so it can have its natural relationship as much as possible to the adjacent grade. And as a matter of fact, I've just learned that the mayor's suggesting that this be called Vince Leggett Park in honor of Vince Leggett, who wrote books about the Chesapeake and the men and women who made their living there, and which I think could be very exciting. But you do see how the two shed roofs kind of interact with the backside of Burtis from this location, and I think play very nicely with it. Next slide. So we have Kim is with us tonight and is happy to speak to any of these historic district guidelines in more detail, but in the exhibit that we've provided you, we've outlined these as to the various sections of the guidelines that we're following and how we think we've met those. We're not going to read these for you tonight, but available to discuss them. And there's another page of these as well.
The DHT traceries, we put together all of the different, design guidelines that we're complying with. I see one typo there that the cornice height was supposed to say meets the 22-foot guideline. So apologize about that editing error. But again, I don't think we need to read them. Obviously, you commissioners know these design guidelines well, and I'm happy to answer any questions about whether or not you agree or have any concerns about whether or not we're complying with them.
Next slide, which
as you can see, and we appreciate your patience with this, the team has worked very, very diligently to ensure that the harbor master and the park comply with the design guidelines for the historic district. They do comply with all of the criteria for the zoning code 2122 and 2162, and we will be requesting when we come before you February 11th, Historic Preservation Commission certificate of appropriateness. Next slide. The views looking back from through the Burtis House, and then of course the last slide is a view of the Welcome Center and the Burtis House together. Thank you so much, and we'll be glad to answer all of your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fogarty and the rest of the team for a very thorough presentation, but concise. In light of the hour and the fact that we have another item to review, I want to just say a couple of things, both for all of us in attendance tonight and anyone listening in or who listens to the recording later. The Planning Commission, the Historic Preservation Commission has great authority over the exterior aspects of this project. But we have no authority over the internal uses, and we have no authority over engineering matters, although we certainly may have some concerns. Historic Annapolis has notified all of its many members and followers and concerned citizens with a blast today on the email. I hope that that's encouraged more people to listen and to voice their concerns at a formal hearing or through the process that I mentioned earlier. But what I want to do now before we go further and take questions from the commissioners is to ask John Power, our staff member, to give us his feedback on the current plan that was just presented to us. And I think he also has some concerns from his department at large that he will also share with us. And then we'll undertake questions from the commissioners. Okay, John?
So, yeah, thanks to everyone for the presentation. Good to see. I have a couple of questions. Since I don't have all of the materials in the application package, which would be really helpful, and I think I should have them and be able to share them, with the public and also commissioners ASAP. But thermally broken windows and doors, where are those? Because all I see are larger expanses of glass.
Thermally
You
broken.
showed it.
I guess you would say that it's part of the system, the window and glass system that we're using. Will have a thermal break, and
Right. You mean that they're dual glazed?
I'll probably have to reach back to my technical team here as we get into more of this. But yeah, I mean it is dual glazed, yes.
Right. Well, I assume that, but I don't have any specifications on the windows, and what you showed was a multi-pane door. So I was wondering if that was what was proposed, because there are always little tweaks to the design between the presentations that we see, and this one's no different. It's different in that it's different from the application that we have in some small ways.
Okay.
So I wanted to mention that we want to come to a single design with all of the attendant specifications for windows, doors, exterior materials, park materials, plantings, everything. And really, it's important that this gets finished. I've asked, and we need to have this now because I'm going to be writing my staff report. So I think that that's important. Yes.
John, thank you for that. And that is very important and is required before we can vote or for approval or not. But I would even remind you that what we're about tonight is to only say as a commission whether we think this is a feasible project.
Right.
And those things are very important for you and your report and our final decisions, but I don't think they're crucial just tonight yet. So let's move on with the things that will let us say yay or nay, go forward. Or
right. This is the voice of someone who was in Bryce's office today, picking up a board for exterior finishes. I want to make sure that we get all of this. I think it's critical.
I appreciate that,
and
John.
that's why I'm bringing it up.
I appreciate that because we want to get you that. We have a lot of detail. The detail is done virtually,
Right.
and so it's
Exactly.
time to share it. Yeah.
So it needs to be in the application. So within the Office of Planning and Zoning, the plans are out, and people are, people who have an architectural background, architects, are coming in within office staff and looking at the building. There is a focus on one particular facade, and that is, let me see, it is the facade that is facing the park, and it's a lot of discussion about it. The reason I'm bringing this up is they're saying two things basically. Actually, three things. One, it's uncertain as to exactly where the entrance is on the southwest building elevation. And in keeping with adjacent properties or properties within the historic district, it would be typical for there to be a defined entrance. So that's one thing. And I would say that's it, at least there, every facade, except for the facade that is closest to the Burtis house, are important facades. But I think this is a particularly important one. It's also been mentioned that, and you take all of these with a grain of salt, but that the balcony be considered to be extended across that facade as it was in previous iterations. And then the last recommendation is, embrace yourself, Bryce, to differentiate the roof from the siding, to not have a more monochromatic or mono species roof and wall material. And the reason for that is because I don't think that there's an equivalent within the historic district. So they're looking at that and saying, okay, so we don't have a defined cornice, which is part of guidelines. So we don't have that. And it does in some ways have to relate to the other buildings. How do we differentiate roof from wall?
Right. I understand. Okay.
Right.
Well, I have those. Let me think about those before I reply. I feel like there are precedents, however, in Annapolis that we can share that certainly do have the same material in the roof as the wall, even though this may not have as defined of a cornice as some of those structures do, I would admit. The balconies, we heard both comments about more individual punched balconies or continuous ones. Dare I say it's maybe a matter of preference, but it also had to do with the fact that this is a working harbor master office space, and we wanted to be able to limit the public access to the portion of the balcony that's immediately adjacent to the harbor master working space without having to put a gate.
With all respect, you could put a panel between the larger public outdoor space and what would be in front of the harbor masters.
So, John, if I may, let me be sure I understand your concern. I understand clearly your concern about the other matters you've mentioned, but on this one, are you addressing this as a design element and suggesting an improved design, or are you saying that the current proposed deck doesn't comply with our standards sufficiently for approval?
No, it's a design element that virtually everyone who's looked at it within my office is focused on it. I would be remiss in not
I
conveying
appreciate
this,
the input. I just wanted to clarify.
The office is looking and they're saying, well, okay, what should we do here? So you've had it both. You've had it different ways before, but I also see an opportunity for greater shading.
Okay.
Too. And shade is an element within this park that's going to be very important at different times of the year. So those three points,
Got it.
they're yours. They're yours to punt around, and other materials coming to me, those and being included in the application, those are critical because we're playing against time here.
So, John, we are playing with time quite literally. It's already almost 8:30. So I just want clarification for myself and everyone else. And that is, Do you think that the current proposal is feasible, or are these necessary changes that must be addressed?
I think it's feasible, and with maybe some modifications.
Great, thank you. Okay, given the time constraints, and I know that the commissioners will have questions, and I especially personally defer to the new commissioners or newer commissioners. So I'm going to withhold any other questions that I might have and ask the commissioners at large if they have questions for the applicant team.
I just have this is Eric Croft speaking.
Yeah.
I just have a comment on the structures, on the architecture. Quite frankly, can you hear me?
Yes.
It seems garbled, but
There was briefly.
There is an
anyway,
echo.
I want to applaud the effort of the massing and the transparency. I think it's a welcome addition to this area of Annapolis. And quite frankly, I like the forward-leaning aesthetic of having the same material on the roof and the side. To me, I think that's a positive. And is the landscape within our jurisdiction? Can we make comments?
Yes, absolutely.
I think shade, as John was mentioning, is really important, both in the park and in this space. And only having one tree seems pretty minimalist. I'm not seeing where I would put more trees because it is a very tight site. But I would, any way we can get more trees, particularly in the Prince George Street Park, I think would be very welcome. The one tree that is located there is really along the nearly the north property line, which will be shading the Navy wall more than it will be shading people, particularly in the early stages. I also, as I mentioned, the Navy wall. How high is that wall, and should we be looking at screening that? Because most of that wall, if I remember correctly, is just a plain brick wall, and it needs. I think it needs some landscape to improve it. I also have a question about maintenance. Who will be maintaining the landscape, and who will be maintaining the park? And is there an endowment that will take care of the maintenance of the public parks? We've all seen parks that go downhill really quickly with a lack of maintenance. I also have a question of why 2 stairs leading up from the Prince George Street and not just one. It seems duplicitous. And the last thing I would say since we don't have the detail of the planting areas, just please keep it simple. Simple. The renderings make it look pretty busy. And I just think from a maintenance standpoint and an aesthetic standpoint, please keep it simple. I think we've all seen rain gardens that look pretty awful, that just are a potpourri of every plant that the designer wants to use. So simplicity is something I would stress.
Thank you,
Commissioner Groff.
Do you think, in your opinion, though, that the presentation tonight is a feasible project that can move forward?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other commissioners with, yes, Mary?
I have a few questions. I'm going to sort of piggyback on some of the things that Eric just said. I live on Prince George Street and have perhaps more intimate knowledge of that little park than most. And so I'm not sure who these questions are for, but one concern is there's currently a very kind of an ownership feel of that park by some residents on Prince George Street, and there are some memorial benches there. I would just like to know what's going to happen to those. I know the new plan seems to have no benches, and there's lots of benches on City Dock right now that have been purchased by families and such. So what's the plan for that?
James,
Yeah, so the plan for the memorial items is to basically assign those memorial plaques to other elements in the park, but we would need to provide you more detail to fully answer that question.
Yeah, the intention, Mary, is definitely to keep all of the memorials. The question is, in what form? Will they all be benches? Will they be plaques on some of the other seating areas? But absolutely, the intention is to include all of them.
Good.
thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. It's something to think about seriously, I think, as you make the final design presentation.
I feel like that Prince George Street Park, I love the vision, I love the plan, how I see it rendered. The reality is, and this talks to what Eric said, I maintain the pots in that park. My neighbors and I go down once or twice a summer and weed that park. That park is a little lost soul right now. And so I guess my relevant question is, what is the plan for the bricking? Because the bricking is horrendously weedy and unkept, and it goes to the maintenance question. But is there something that can be done for all of this bricking so it doesn't end up just growing weeds everywhere?
I would have to see exactly where the issue is that you're describing, but sometimes, and I know this is an issue down there today, where you get standing water and poor drainage, you get sediment and silt that builds up, and that provides a media for the weeds to grow in. Whereas, on other parts of Dock Street that are more heavily traveled and drained well have the same type of brick paving, but the weeds are not as much of an issue. So that could be part of it. But with proper installation, and good design, that shouldn't be something that's, occurring a lot.
And
And
to
we'll have a
Mary's
concrete-
question, oh, I'm
We'll have
sorry.
a concrete slab below the brick
That's right.
as well as sand.
Mm-hmm.
Which there probably isn't now.
Yes.
Yeah, if the
I think
sand is
you're
washed
right,
out, replaced by dirt.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
Peter-
anything you can do to cut down on the need for such maintenance would be wonderful. I agree with Eric about the 2 steps going up to that, and in the rendering that you show, there's this beautiful, I guess, I'm not sure what the wall is made out of, but it goes along the wheelchair ramp, sort of a nice, and that's wonderful. People can sit on it. It's ADA compliant, but of course, I'm just envisioning it with graffiti all over it. And, again, are there materials that can be chosen that will minimize the aging and the desire to put your own stamp on it? That's currently a problem at that park.
Ms. Fogarty, did you want to say something to that point?
I will let them answer the question. I was going to talk about maintenance after either Bryce or James answers
Okay.
Mary's question about materials.
Okay.
We can come back with, I mean, it's like suggestions for cleaning basically, but I don't know that there's necessarily things we can do with the material that deter someone from wanting to do graffiti.
Well,
So-
no, I mean, are there materials that are easier to clean or less likely to, be permanently marked?
Yes, there are. And I don't know the answer specifically for that granite that we've selected, but it's something we should consider.
I don't think that our authority extends to making a requirement on your use of those materials. It's more the consistency with the surrounding historic district use of materials. But I would ask you, just as a citizen, I think Ms. Bannon is raising a very good issue. So try to give it a little more thought and see if you can help us out
Yeah.
with that.
And then with
will.
respect to maintenance, there will be a person from the Parks Department as well as access for a person from Public Works who will be there at the Harbor Master Building for permanent maintenance of that area.
That would be great. Okay, and then my last comment, I know we're running tight. The rendering where you show the Burtis House and the buildings behind it, and then we were talking about the cornice and the ridge lines. What is the reasoning of why the two new buildings have a taller, sharper peak than the Burtis House? Why didn't you choose to just mimic the roof line? Is that empty space? It's just a taller roof?
Yeah, it's that's a good question. Very good question. I mean, partly I think it is the stature of a building that has a sharper pitch to its roof, that this structure, you know, some people have felt this needs to be somewhat iconic, this building we're building. The Captain Burtis's house was not like that at all, right? When it was built.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. It really is about design, kind of proportionality, I guess. But the other is that, you know, this is a very tight space that we're putting 2 floors in. So I think the more we can create some headroom, and the exposed beams, I think, are going to be beautiful and really nice. So it makes a big difference when you can get up a little bit higher with that. So that was my rationale.
Okay.
I like it.
I'm not going to say anything yet, but Mary, do you think this is a feasible project to move forward?
Yes, with
Yeah.
our concerns being addressed
Exactly.
and yes.
Exactly. Okay. There are still 3 other commissioners in addition to myself. Do any of you have questions?
I do, if I may.
Good. Go.
I do after Bill.
Basically, I'm looking at the building, and I know Eric enjoys the monocolored roof to wall, but it seems to leave a true definition of the building. It just creates, in my mind, a more bland building that's just going to fade into the background. And with that in mind, a different material, just a slightly different color to one of them, a pattern difference in how the material is applied at that break between the roof and wall would give a definition that says this is roof, this is wall, this is building, not just we took a material, we folded it over a couple times, and it could have just been a cardboard box. Not to be insulting, it's just the way, my initial impression of what I saw in the renderings. With part of that also comes the entrance to the building. Other than the fact that in one of the renderings you had a sign over the door that said entrance, I saw nothing there that said this is where I should go to as I'm walking up to the building. It seemed very undefined in that way. It was just another glass wall. And it'd be nice for people. I know when I'm going to a building, the first thing I look for is where's the entrance. And if I have to hunt for it, it makes it a little frustrating sometimes.
Bryce, doesn't your palette allow you to address that fairly easily? All your different materials.
Well, you know, I feel as though that the peak of the roof and all that glass really speaks to entrance more so than the other side. Maybe more ground level views here will make that a little bit more obvious, perhaps. And but we will think about, and it is something we've talked about at length. And maybe there's more that we can do there with a little bit more of an overhang or something else there. So we will certainly try to address that. I understand.
One of the things, I'm not even saying you have to change the building in this case. What drew my attention to an entrance was actually the steps on the side adjacent to the entrance.
Right.
There's steps there that says, okay, we have a path where people were walking to the building. There's the entrance. And then I get there in my imagination, go, okay, where's the entrance?
Right. No, I understand. And of course, with ADA, unfortunately, we cannot have steps there. But I think there may be some other things with lighting and some other accoutrement or accessories that might make a difference there in terms of entrance. And signage is important, but I think we can probably share some when we next meet, some better ground level views closer that will perhaps make a difference. I don't think we can do a lot more with the architecture per se. I think it is other types of landscape devices.
Okay. Bill?
Well, in my thoughts, just I'm not arguing with you, Bryce. I'm just discussing.
I understand. We appreciate the input.
If there was just, even if it was just a heavier framework or a repetition of the gabled end that created just an outline of a smaller portion that would say this is entrance. There's something special about this one part. Or it could even just be the way the sidewalk delineates its path into that space, where there's material, texture, color, again, on that line. It just seems to me it needs to be more intuitive. Most buildings don't have a sign that say entrance.
Right. I appreciate that input very much.
Yeah.
And I think materials and pattern could make a big difference there as well.
Yeah.
And that is really all I have to say that someone else hasn't said, so I don't want to drag this out. Thank you, sir, for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you consider it a feasible project to move forward, Bill?
I think all projects are feasible. Yes, I think this one can move forward.
Good. I'm going to keep that in mind. Cecil, you wanted to ask some questions?
Yeah, thank you. I'll open up and I'll say I think the project is feasible. I think it looks fantastic. I think like the other commissioners, I had a couple of quick comments. First one is in line with history, where are the oyster shells as a part of the materials for construction? I think a long time ago, somebody said that all of City Dock is built on oyster shells. I don't know how feasible that is anymore, but and
here we go. Oyster shell path to the entrance.
Tabby.
Well, it is something we discussed quite a bit, and there's oyster tabby. I don't know if you know oyster tabby wall, but I love it.
Yeah,
and
I do
somehow
too.
we haven't gotten that around the base yet. It's not easy to construct, they tell me, but
Bryce,
that was more of a fun comment. Obviously,
I think that's a great comment, and I'm just kind of flying with it here. You could emphasize the entrance with tabby posts or tabby frame or something. Just a thought.
Second brief comment that I'll defer to some of the other experts here on design and architecture and whatnot. But I had my opinion on the siding and the roof being similar there with lack of differentiation. It popped out to me as well, and I was thinking about it the whole time. But then I came back to what was interesting, and it actually mimics all of the buildings that were once there on the waterfront. And so I kind of started to pull back, because my own personal preference, if I was designing the building for myself, would have that differentiation for sure. But I did think that that respect to the industrial waterfront that was once there, I think it's a very interesting comparison. I thought that was very cool. So I don't necessarily have anything other than I wanted to offer that perspective for the lack of differentiation between the roof and the siding. But yeah, that's not my expertise. I think that's personal preference. But the one comment that I didn't see an answer to was there was a lighting plan that was presented. And it was very clear locations of where lighting would be provided for public spaces, which I think is fantastic. But on the renderings, I didn't see any light fixtures whatsoever other than the ones within the building. And I think, again, I think that lighting plan seemed to be comprehensive. It seemed to cover the needs. But when I think about a design perspective and what I'm looking at in a building, if there's two huge light posts right in front that we weren't aware of, obviously, I think that changes the entire perspective of the entrance. So I don't know what that looks like. But for me, I'd like to better understand, you know, where the lighting comes into play, you know, again, outside of the building itself, not the lights under the deck and not the light in the building illuminating the beams, although I think that would be very cool, but more so the public space lighting. And, you know, is that a lamp post? Is that, you know, I don't know what it is, but I think that's an important part of the design.
Very
Cecil,
important.
I only say this because you are a relatively new member of the commission. That is required. They will have to give detailed specs for all of that. That's part of what John was asking for, and hoped that he would already have in his hands. So we will see that, and we must review it, and we must find it in compliance, whatever they propose.
Well, and I think they have the lighting design plan from like a 2D paper perspective,
Well,
but I didn't
yes.
see any of the renderings of
Right, they
what
have a
that- yeah.
location plan, but they haven't shown us the fixtures, I should say, at all.
We'll do a whole segment on lighting next time.
Okay, Kim,
But
you and I.
let me say this. It can't be next time. We have to get it in the application now.
Right. I mean, you'll have it in your hands.
John, we hear you. We are all doing it. We know we've committed. We'll have it.
Okay.
Thank you, Lily. Kim, you and I are the last ones. What do you have?
Alrighty, so I guess I'll start by saying it looks feasible. That's your question, your opening question, or your final question for us. And I think that the other commissioners have asked a lot of the questions that came to my mind and I thought about. And so I think that I will leave it there and just say that, yes, we are interested because the devil is in the details. And so we're interested to see more details and information so that we can be informed to make the best decisions possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim. Well, that leaves me as the only commissioner who hasn't spoken, and I'm going to shock particularly John and Ms. Fogarty, who've known me the longest. I'm only going to say I consider this a completely feasible project and thank the team for the hard work they've already put in. And so I think we've concluded our business on this matter for this evening. Thank you all, the commissioners, particularly for raising some very good issues to be concerned by the team. But thank you, Ms. Fogarty and the rest of the team for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank all of
commissioners.
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
In light of the hour, I'm going to suggest two things. A brief break of 5 minutes, and then if we can get a representative from the St. Mary's, I'm just referring to that as a shorthand project. During that break, I'd like to speak with that representative briefly. You don't have to take a break. I'm not taking a break, but if anybody wants one, now's the time. Can we promote a member of the St. Mary's team?
The person doing the presentation is Pat Mulligan.
Is she the only person who's going to represent them tonight? John, do you know?
I think so, yes.
Oh, okay. Pat, if you can unmute yourself and if you're available, I'd like to ask you a quick question.
Certainly.
Great. I know this is an imposition and I hesitate to ask. And so I hope when I ask, you'll know that you should answer what is in your best interest and your projects and your team's interest. We have gone almost 2 hours already, and I assume that your presentation, we want to give you all the time that you need to make it effectively. Would you consider coming back at another time?
Certainly. John, is there any reason I ought not to? You know where I am in permitting. I will be away for the next 2 weeks. Let me explain where we are in permitting, and I think the answer is yes. Oh, we are nearly done with MDE. We're meeting tomorrow morning to go over our monitoring plan for the oysters, for the oyster reef. And they have sent it on to the city through public comment, through Army Corps of Engineers. So I think we're at your disposal. And let me tell you, it might be better because I've lost my technical support. The designer couldn't stay on this long from Biohabitat, so they broke off. So I'm easy either way.
John, don't you think it'd be feasible to reschedule them for the administrative meeting next month?
Of course,
What date
of
would that be?
course. Let me see. I have to look at my calendar. I don't have it
Last
put
Thursday,
through.
February.
Yeah, so it's the 27th.
27th of February. Yes, certainly.
Okay. Well, I thank you for that consideration, and I apologize for the imposition of keeping you waiting just to tell us that.
That's all right.
But I look forward to seeing you next month.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Thank you,
Pat, thanks
everyone.
for your flexibility. Thank you.
Certainly.
Yes, thank you very much.
Certainly.
Now,
Good night, everyone.
good night.
Good night.
Thank you. You have a good one.
You too.
Commissioners, we actually have a very brief other item on the agenda that's important, but is as long or as short as John wants to make it. John, do you have any report to make to us on other matters?
Well, certainly the most important project in the city is the one that we just saw. And it's going to have an impact on views and viewscapes, use of the city dock for generations. So that really is a central focus, even within my office.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, of
Um,
course, you'll be on the next agenda, despite the fact that we all have at least the city dock and perhaps other issues that you and I, matters that you and I can discuss, but you'll have your regularly scheduled opportunity to address violations and other such matters at the next meeting. Okay.
Well, now is an opportunity for most violators to do what they need to do, because when it's 10 degrees, I don't tend to walk the city a whole lot. So, but I have been going out. I saw Mary, taking pictures. It was frigid.
Have you been riding your bike outside?
We were hiding under the Burtis house trying to get warm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, really, I want to thank all of you commissioners. You obviously were paying close attention and raising some very significant issues. I know the team will consider them, but we'll see if they meet our expectations in a few weeks. So I will close the meeting at this time and wish you all a good night and hope to see you again on February the 11th, if not sooner.